without sight. Connect, collaborate, and create.
Hello, and welcome to the Sound Without Sight podcast. In this episode, we share updates from the Audio Developer Conference, ADC24. Community member Trahern Culver reported live from the event, and later in this podcast, you'll hear the interviews that he captured with heritage audio company SSL, musician Andre Louis, and software instrument company Spitfire Audio. Trey used a Zoom H4 Essential recorder with its built-in accessibility voice guidance to capture these. But first, here are some thoughts from Guillem Leon about ADC24's Inclusive Design Within Audio Products workshop, which I was honoured to chair.
Hi, my name is Guillem Leon. I'm a classical pianist by trade and also a composer and producer. I am totally blind. I'm, of course, a user of assistive technology and accessible software and hardware. And this year, once again, I have been very, very fortunate to be invited to attend the Audio Developer Conference 2024. So last year, I wrote a kind of summary and overview of my thoughts of what was said during the workshop that Sound Without Sight hosted, the Inclusive Design and Accessibility Workshop. And it seems that the workshop was successful because we once again saw an Inclusive Design and Accessibility Workshop this year, also hosted by Sound Without Sight. And I just wanted to point out and talk to you about some of the highlights of this year's workshop and some of the things that stood out to me and my thoughts on a couple of the points that were discussed. So this was about 3-hour-long workshop, so there was quite a lot of ground covered. We started off with some introductions from all the panelists, of course. We went on to an overview of the social model of disability and some discussion about the importance of accessibility in mainstream audio technology and why we should design inclusively, and some guidelines for best practices for inclusive design as well. So then after a little break, we had a couple of case studies. We first saw Ableton. We saw AD speaking about what Ableton has learned after investing in accessibility and after working directly with their community of users during the development of Live 12 and the Push 3 and the Move. And we actually saw a little demonstration of the Move. So Andre did a short but very intense demonstration of the Ableton Move and the accessibility features. The second case study was from Arcana and how they built their company around inclusive design with the development of the Arcana Strum, which is a fully inclusive and fully accessible instrument. And at the very end of the workshop, we just had some time for Q&A with all of the panelists. So, firstly, I think for me, the first thing that stood out to me, and a very pleasant surprise at that, was just how many people were present at the workshop and how much they wanted to talk about this. So you can hear this in the recording when Liz starts conversations with the room. You can hear the amount of people in the room, and you can hear how much they care about this and how much they want to talk about this and how much interest they have in discussing this with other people, right? And I think that's really what we need right now. And I think that's why these workshops are important and why it's so important that so many people came to these workshops, because right now we need people talking about this. We need not just the companies to be doing the work of keeping inclusive design in mind from the very beginning, but just the general public and the public that attends these workshops to be aware of how important this is. And I think it's wonderful that so many people came and so many people have been made aware and so many people want to be aware of this. And for me, that really has been just one of the biggest takeaways and just a very pleasant surprise about this workshop. I also just really liked how much emphasis was put on other things besides screen reader and low vision accessibility. I mean, after all, this is Sound Without Sight, and the workshop was hosted by Sound Without Sight. So, of course, to some extent, that's always going to become part of the main focus. But we had the presentation about the Arcana Strum, and we had so many examples just when talking about accessibility in general. When AD was giving their presentation, and during the introduction as well, during the first section, when we were talking about things besides low vision accessibility. And I think I am definitely guilty of this. I am guilty of thinking of accessibility in ways that would help me and other blind and low vision users. And sometimes that makes me forget that there are a lot more people to be included. And I think it's very important for a workshop hosted by someone like Sound Without Sight to also talk about other types of accessibility, other types of people that we could be including with accessibility work. I have a bit of a personal story with Ableton. Ableton's work with accessibility has honestly made all the difference for me, and it has allowed me to get a job with a company that I really admired. So it was a case of I reached out to this company. It's an audiobook production company, and I reached out to them around the time that Ableton Live 12 came out with the accessibility features. And these two events had no relation to each other. I did not know that they used Ableton for their productions. So I just happened to reach out to them around that time. And their first response was, oh, well, we use this program called Ableton Live. We're not entirely sure if that's going to work for you. And I was like, well, as a matter of fact, now that will be fine. And it was. It has been fine. I have been able to work with them. They have been incredibly accommodating. They have slowly been upgrading all of their employees to Ableton Live 12. And thanks to Ableton's work, I have a job. I can honestly say that their accessibility work has literally made all the difference for me having a job. And I know, I'm 100% sure that mine isn't the only story or the first or the last story that they will hear or that any company will hear after they make their product accessible. And I can only hope that they know and that other people know that this is the result of their work, that their work has made all the difference for me in the professional world. And I think Ableton is just remarkable in general, not just because of their work with Live, but because they've managed to exemplify what inclusive design really means. So Live, of course, was not designed with inclusion in mind, and we did not have accessibility until Ableton Live 12 came out. And it's remarkable that they've been able to get it to the state where it is now without it being at all accessible just one major version before. And then with the products that they've released since then, so a good example of this is the Ableton Move. From the very first release of the Ableton Move, we saw a pretty interesting and innovative way to do accessibility from the very beginning, from the very first version of the product. And I think this is just telling of what can happen when inclusive design is observed from the very beginning. So I wanted to address something that was said about Focusrite and about their advances in accessibility. It was mentioned that on their website right now, and this was also something they said about the essential line of Zoom recorders, that accessibility was listed as a feature alongside the rest on the main page. And I think this is the way to go right now. This is definitely, it is a step forward, undoubtedly. But I also think that it's an intermediate step to what should be the end goal, which should definitely be to not have to list accessibility as a feature. So what I mean by that is that right now in the current climate, it's definitely very important to highlight accessibility as something that, you know, that your company might be doing, or that, you know, that something that is focused on and a feature alongside everything else, alongside everything that you advertise about your product. But what we should be aiming for is for it to be so ingrained into the design process of everything that it doesn't need to be listed as a feature. You should be able to assume that a certain device or a certain piece of software is going to be accessible for you by design. So right now, I think this is most definitely the way to go, and I'm very happy that Focusrite and Zoom, and I'm sure many others, are doing this. But I also think it's important to keep in mind that this is an intermediary step toward not having to advertise this at all. So one kind of recurring leitmotif during the workshop was the matter of giving users options as something that is very important to accessibility. And I feel very strongly about this. I believe I covered this last year as well. I think it was Arvid from SoftTube that talked about this during last year's workshop. I think this is actually one of the integral parts to accessibility, is letting people choose how they want the information to be presented within the accessibility features that a certain product might offer. Because after all, when we talk about accessibility and when we want to make something accessible, we want it to be accessible to everyone. And not every member of a specific collective is going to have the same needs. So, for example, when it comes to screen reader users, I know that certain screen reader users want to get information in a different order. Some people like the screen readers to be more or less verbose. I personally don't like too much verbosity. If I know a program well, I want just the information that I want, and sometimes not in the order that might be the most logical. So giving people options, I think, is absolutely key for any kind of accessibility. And I'm so glad that this was mentioned so many times by so many different panelists during this workshop, because this definitely is, at least to me, a core part of what being accessible means. And it's quite often overlooked. So I'm very happy that it kept coming up, and I hope it does keep coming up, and I hope people do realize the importance of this. So all in all, I must say I had very high hopes for this workshop, and I had very high expectations for what this year would bring after last year. And I can say without a doubt that I am every bit as happy as I was hoping to be, and my expectations have been more than just met, and I'm just so happy that this happened again. And I'm sure this won't be the last workshop either. I mean, we're already seeing what's coming from all of the work that Sound Without Sight and all of the other companies are putting in. We're seeing what Ableton have achieved. We're seeing what Arcana has built from the ground up, and what Focusrite is doing, and what Zoom did with their Essential series of recorders. And there's just so many companies that are getting on the accessibility bandwagon. And I'm just so very happy to see this. I'm so happy to see representation of this at an event such as the ADC. I'm very, very happy that this workshop happened again this year, and it looks, or at least I hope, that it won't be the last time it happens. And let's keep moving forward with accessibility. Let's keep inclusive design going, and let's make more companies aware and more individuals aware. This is what these workshops are achieving, and I just think it's wonderful. And I very much look forward to seeing where this will go.
As evidence of the great strides being made towards accessibility, Trahern Culver caught up with Tom Wood and Mike Emmett from Solid State Logic, SSL, about the recent progress they've made with their plugins.
We're a heritage British audio brand, started up with consoles for recording studios and diversified into live sound desks, broadcast desks, and now plugins and controllers and audio interfaces.
Brilliant. So Mike, tell me a bit about how you came to work for SSL and how you got into the audio industry almost.
Oh, okay. Well, I was working in the games industry first, and I worked with a couple of people, one of which split off to start Nugent Audio.
Yeah.
He was my lead programmer on some of the games that I worked on there, and I moved over to Nugent, and then stuck around in audio. That was maybe 17 years ago, I think.
Oh, wow, okay. So, Tom, you tell me a bit more about how you got into the industry.
So I did music and sound recording at the University of Surrey, and freelanced for a couple of years after that. I did some music production, did some dialogue editing for film, did a little bit of game audio editing, and then decided to get into R&D to try and get back to learning, and I applied for the job at Solid State Logic, and here I am 3 years later.
Okay, great. So, Mike, tell us a bit about what you do at Solid State Logic, what your role is almost.
Okay, so I'm the project manager and the lead of the Juice plugin team. So I was a software engineer first, and I've kind of moved into more management and project management. But wherever I can, I try to get some coding in if I'm able.
Great. Do you still code, or are you more of a managerial role now?
It's more managerial at the moment. When I can, I code, but those moments are fleeting.
The bug never goes away, though.
It never does. No,
unless you fix it, of course. So, Tom, tell us more about what you do at SSL and your role in the company.
Yeah, I'm a senior functional test engineer, which is sort of our name for QA. I make sure that things don't break by trying to break them effectively.
That's the best, really.
Yeah, absolutely. So I've worked across the consoles and the plugins and the controllers and the interfaces. I'm currently focusing a lot on the plugins and controllers at the moment.
Oh, amazing. So I know many of our listeners now have some kind of visual impairment and are blind. Some have other disabilities as well. I know that SSL has been making strides in the accessibility field. Just tell me a bit about where you're at now and how it started, how the journey started out.
So the journey for that started, probably from the Juice ADC. Well, I can't remember which one it was, but there was a point, maybe 4 years ago, I think, where there was a real push on accessibility, and me and John Sandman, our product designer for plugins, we were both at that. We started talking to Jay Dyson at the ADC there. He was doing a presentation which we were blown away by, of how he was able to use various controllers and plugins with being entirely blind. And I think just seeing the level of support that he was getting with those products was, and the way that he was then able to manipulate them and produce effects with them quicker than able-sighted people. I thought it was so quick. It blew me away, and I thought, well, this is something that I'd really like to be able to get into. It's something that we should be supporting. I mean, a company that like SSL, really, I would ideally prefer if we were leading the way on this, but can't lead the way on everything.
No.
Okay, so Tom, tell me how you got involved in the project and what your role is now.
So since I test the plugins and we started adding the accessibility features to the plugins, I end up testing the accessibility features in the plugins. But that started when, well, I guess it was fairly early on. We had a demo from Jay, and he came into the office to give a demo to some of the software engineers and some of the test team, and that really blew me away as well. That was amazing. Navigating Logic and then just like playing keys and putting down drum tracks and stuff. It was great. And so yeah, since then a screen reader has been part of my testing of the plugins whenever I pass over them.
So it's now a case basically of, back in the day you would have thought you were crazy if your computer was talking to you. Now it's just everyday occurrences.
Yeah. And actually we have had a couple of bugs where things talk to us when we don't want them to as well.
Okay.
So in that case, yeah, it really was. I'm going crazy, but no.
Oh yeah, that was my bug.
So both of you, tell us a bit about where the accessibility is now. And I know the Halloween plugin's accessible, but what other plugins from the range are accessible, and what level of accessibility are they at?
So yeah, for anything that's coming out now, we aim to give full accessibility for every control. Obviously, there are some controls that are more difficult than others to get across. There's some things that are very visual, like an EQ, for instance. Dynamic EQ is very difficult to get across. We would need to have a bit more of a think on things like that. But anything that's from our kind of hardware replication range to the Fusion range, those are fully accessible. That came out fairly recently. The DS product was a re-release of that. That's got full accessibility. All of our channel strips.
That's the DSer, right? The DS.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, so 4K-E, one of our channel strips is currently accessible, and then we're hoping to expand that to the other channel strips soon.
In the building, those are all ready to go.
Yes,
We're just waiting for the next release of those.
Okay, and there are obviously many imitators, but there's only one true creator. So tell us more about why people should use the SSL plugins, which obviously are in the range.
Sure. I mean, I'm definitely not a sales person, and I'm no good at this, but I'll give it a go. I suppose one of the things is that we are basing a lot of channel strips on heritage consoles, and those consoles are being modeled by our DSP engineers who have access to the schematics and the actual hardware of the old console. So a 4KB, for instance, not many of those were made, but we still have a channel strip from back in the day, so we can actually model it.
And how about yourself?
Oh, I don't know the answer to this. I'm definitely not a salesperson. I'm a software engineer. You should use our products because they're amazing, is what I would say.
I mean, that's good enough. So moving on, talk to us about the future of accessibility at SSL and what the current standpoint is, what the current thinking is.
Well, we've done a number of things. We've had a number of features to our plugin range that we're quite happy with. So we've got a way of we've got a list of shortcuts. You can jump around from sections within, say, for instance, the channel strip. You can jump from the EQ section to the filter section. You don't have to cycle through all the controls to get to those things. You can jump ahead. Similar with the meters, we've put shortcuts in for all of our meters, and you can use the standard click feature within your accessibility to get a reading of those meters at the point where you want to hear them. You don't have to like refocus on them or anything like that. There's little things that we're doing at every point where we're trying to say, well, how is this usable? Is it accessible? Can we make it better? Those are some of the things we've started with. Those are the things that are in our current plugins that are available. Those are the things that are coming out in our re-releases as we get to those. There's always more you can do. I went to a talk on accessibility this week, and there was a question raised about high contrast and low contrast modes. I'd love to add something like that. I think those are great ideas. The more accessible you can make your plugin, your product, the better. And I'd like to see that we do it with some of our other software options as well. Obviously, the biggest thing for us there is time. It will take time to do some of them. They've been around for a while, and the code is there's a lot of code to touch to get things going, but we will strive to do so.
And what's the commitment of SSL to accessibility going forward?
Well, we're still working with JDason, and I believe that there's every intention of continuing to add accessibility in everything we've got coming out. Certainly in terms of plugins, and then moving on to 360 when the SSL 360 application when we can. Plugins are what we're currently focusing on at the moment.
Okay, great. Any closing words?
I've really enjoyed all the chat and focus on accessibility here at ADC this year. This is my first ADC, but
Same here.
Oh, good. It was really nice to meet everyone involved with Sound Without Sight, and meet you guys and chat to you guys.
Ditto on that one. I think there's an awful lot that we take from these talks for the conferences. A lot of inspiration, a lot of really impressive work being done by everyone involved, the people presenting. Yourselves, some of the accessibility controllers, for instance, that have been shown off this last couple of days have been really cool. I've enjoyed playing with those as well. It's just great to see what everyone's doing in the field and where it's all going.
Tom, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Mike, thank you very much.
Thanks very much.
All right, take care, guys. Have a great rest of the ADC.
Trey also caught up with musician and accessibility consultant Andre Louis.
We have someone very special in front of me. I've been looking forward to interviewing for a while. Andre Louis.
Hello, good afternoon.
How are you doing?
I'm all right, thanks. Yes, I'm alive, and it's been a good couple of days, and it's been fun.
So, before we get started, just tell us a bit about yourself and how you got started in music.
So, when I was 3 years old, my parents bought me one of these one-at-a-time monophonic keyboards, and apparently one of the first things I played on it was the EastEnders theme. I don't remember that, but that was how I got started, and I did a little bit of music in school and stuff, but nothing really serious. But because music's always been around me and I've always been around it kind of maybe became serious as I got older. So I never stopped playing music, and as a result, maybe just because of that fact, it's always been a part of my life, yeah.
Okay, so you're a totally blind musician. You've been doing this for quite a long while. Tell us a bit about the kit you started off with.
Well, apart from that keyboard, it was many years before I got something meaningful. The first meaningful keyboard I got was for my 15th birthday, and it was a Yamaha PSR 520. And I liked that keyboard, but it didn't have a very good sequencer. So what I used to do was Yamaha called these things like multipads, and there were 4 of them. So I would record a thing into one pad, and you couldn't hear what was playing when you hit the next pad. You just had to kind of remember. So I played to a click, you couldn't quantize them, and then you could get them to trigger all of those pads at once and hope that whatever you played was reasonable. So that was kind of how I did anything, really. After that, I was at Worcester at the time, so Worcester had better gear than I did. I was using the Yamaha SQ16 keyboard from 1991 or something, but I paired it with a Roland SC55 sound module. And that meant that I could use General MIDI to sequence, and that was actually the start of my real sequencing life. So we're talking 1995 or 6 at that point. And after that, I left Worcester in 2000, and I went to Royal National College in Hereford for 2 years, under the tutelage of Jez Nash, who I will forever be thankful for, because he hooked me up with Cubase. And I had a template, right? Cubase 3.7. I had a template that was geared towards, because I then bought an SC88, so it was like a step up from what I was using before. So as a result of that, I was able to basically use GS by that point, with Cubase and do all sorts of fun things. And I still have a lot of those old tracks I've written, because MIDI files, and you just keep them. And, house moves and life moves and the whole world changes. But as long as you keep your MIDI files around, you've got your history. I've got 30 years or so of history that I'm so happy to have.
That's pretty interesting. And in terms of your musicianship and professional career and stuff, what are you doing now? Where are you at now?
Right, so nowadays, as of 2016, I skipped a whole load of life. Let me go back. 2003, I started using this piece of software called QWS, Quick Window Sequencer, written by a blind guy, James Bowden, actually. Some of you may have heard of James Bowden. He now works for RNIB, and he wrote his own MIDI sequencer, as you do, because you didn't like any of the commercial offerings. So as a result of that, it became very obvious to me that because it was written by a blind guy, it was very accessible. And I wrote 13 years of my life with this sequencer, and I will forever be thankful to have had that in my life. So post-2016, I started using Logic, and not for any reason that I disliked QWS, but because an opportunity came up to use Logic paired with Native Instruments stuff, and so I took that. And so nowadays I use Logic alongside Native Instruments hardware and software, like Complete Control. And very recently, as in the last couple of weeks, I've been using Ableton Move. And I often pair that with Logic as well. So I'll bounce the track out from Ableton Move hardware to WAV file, bring it into Logic and work on it that way. So yeah, as of 2016, now 2024 at the time of this recording, it's 8 years I've been using Logic. And that's been my primary DAW for 8 years.
And in terms of music, are you doing production or is it composing for people or soundtrack work? What kind of things do you do?
All of the above, actually. For myself, for other people, I produce, I compose, I do music for podcast and YouTube, and I run a YouTube channel as well. So I do a bit of everything. I try to keep my hand in the game at whatever I need to keep it in. I've recorded vocalists, I've worked with people, we've released material together, we've been played on BBC Six Music, done a bunch of stuff. And as of 2021, for example, I started working with a drum and bass producer, so it's been a really fun kind of whirlwind few years. Like, the first time I took Logic on tour with me was 2016. So I had a MacBook Air, a very low-powered MacBook Air at the time, because I was on a budget. And I went on tour with a band, and I used Logic on stage. And people thought I was crazy. It's like, this A, blind guy, B, laptop on stage, are you mad? No, I wasn't mad. I was just forward-thinking. And I still do that to this day. So, yeah, it's me.
Wow, so as a blind musician, tell us more about the challenges which you faced and maybe still face, I don't know.
I don't know. You know what? I think I've had it quite easy, to be fair, compared to a lot of people. I've often landed on my feet. Like, I've been handed a good few opportunities that I've tried to just take with both hands, because if you say no to things too many times or don't take them, people just will stop asking you things. So if you can, I just find that if you can say yes and not feel too bad about it, you can enjoy yourself and have a really good time. So it's kind of my ethos wherever possible to, if someone says, do you want to try this thing? I'll try and do it once. And if you don't like it, I won't do it again, but it's good to try a few things. So the issues I faced, I suppose, mainly is just travel. Oftentimes people want you to go do something, but they don't want to give you anything for that something. And I'm like, if I'm leaving my house with my gear, I can't just take it on public transport because I only have two hands. And if I've got to carry a keyboard amplifier and a stand and use a cane, we're going to have a problem. So that means a cab, yeah?
Yeah, so how does that work? Do you, and I'm going to ask you this, do you use access to work, or do you have like the cab included in the agreement with whoever's paying you? How does that work?
Glad you asked. I just tend to use Uber. It keeps me honest, it keeps them honest. And if they're willing to pay expenses, great. If you're not willing to do that, then I'm not willing to do the gig. Because I shouldn't be out of pocket for something you want me to do. Like, that doesn't work.
Oh, okay, so what, you just simply tell them, I have to have Uber or a cab, which you have to pay for. If you don't pay for it, there's no gig, my friend, that kind of thing.
It should be included in the fee, right? If you're doing something, you've got to have a fee, and you've got to agree that ahead of time and make sure that expenses are included as part of or in excess of the fee. That's important. You've got to talk about those things.
Okay. And I wanted to ask you this question because there's a lot of people who listen to these interviews. Maybe they might be starting out on their musician journeys, blind musicians, and this kind of thing. What advice would you give them for interacting with the sighted world as musicians?
That is a question I get asked in all sorts of different ways, and I think the answer differs from moment to moment. Right now, in 2024, I think my advice would be, and Christian Henson from Crow Hill said this as well, you need a social media presence because that is your portfolio. If you can show people what you're capable of and you have real world presence online, that's going to be better than having nothing, right? You can be the best musician in the world. You can be a virtuoso pianist, player, violinist, guitarist. If you've got nothing to show for it other than hearsay, that is not good enough. Make sure you have a presence that you can link to, show people what you're capable of, and that you are, in fact, capable and therefore employable on the gig.
Does this presence have to be private or can it be public or?
It's got to be linkable. If you can link it and people can see it, that's good enough. It doesn't have to be public, but then how will people find you and search you if it's not?
Any other advice that you would give? Or?
Be yourself. Don't fake it till you make it. Just be good old-fashioned you. And if the people that want to hire you don't want the you, then let them have somebody else. There'll be another opportunity for you to network and thrive and do what you want to do, I think. It's the best thing. If you try to be other people or try to be a facsimile of yourself, you're not being true to yourself. And from the minute you're not true to yourself, that's not the real you. And that might sound secular, because it is, but it's important to look after number one, and that's you. Treat you with respect.
And about accessibility in general, because there's a lot of like different things happening with the able to move and everything like this. What is the future of accessibility in music tech from your perspective?
I think Ableton set the bar really high with live, and Logic has been accessible for a long time. Pro Tools has been accessible kind of for a long time. Reaper has, Reaper Access and things. I think a lot of these companies need to realize that if you're not doing accessibility, you're not doing it right at all, period. Because you could cut out a huge swathe of the population by being, I don't want to use the word lazy, but lazy, all right? If you do accessibility and start thinking about it and getting it implemented on your roadmap, people will start using your product. People that may never have thought that your product was for them. But by not doing it, right, there's a huge swathe of the world that is disabled in some way or another. And it might just be something as simple as, I can't see bright light in the middle of the day. So you want a contrast setting. And that's the most minimal thing I can think of. And that's just top of my head. I'm sure there's something even lesser or something even more than that. But accessibility is accessibility. When you start considering it and you start implementing it, people that could not previously use your product can use your product. And yes, the R&D outlay is going to be huge at first. There's a lot of give and maybe not a lot of take. But if you give your all, people can start really benefiting from that, and you will start to gain more users. And more users is more money, right? Who doesn't want more money? Why wouldn't you do accessibility? And this is what AD said yesterday at our talk here at ADC. They said, why not? So forget the why we should do accessibility. The question is, why don't we do accessibility? That is it.
That's interesting, and it's really good that you said it in a really direct way. And I want to actually ask you, if you've got time, talk to us a little bit about your journey with Able to Move, because you're massively into Able to Move and things. It would be good to talk about that if you can.
I will keep it short and sweet. I got given an early production unit, tested it with AD Weekly for a while, and we talked about some of the pain points that we see. And at the moment, the things that we have brought up are still pain points, but that does not stop it being a usable product. And the reason that they're still pain points is because the push to get the thing released and the code that was going to make that happen, that was already committed and everything. So now that it is released and the launch has been, successful, maybe the developers can now go back over those things that we reported on and actually fix a lot of them. For example, you can't read the tempo value when you turn the dial in the tempo setting. It's a minor thing. So you find a workaround. And the workaround in my case is to turn the dial and then undo that turn. and it will say undo tempo set to whatever the BPM is. That's not a huge deal. If it didn't say anything when I did that, that would be more of a huge deal. It's good if you want to sync up your tempo to something else, you want to know what that BPM is. So the accessibility issues with Move, and I say issues lightly, are not showstoppers. They are generally easy to fix and to deal with. The biggest one, I think, obviously, is the fact that you can't read the Wi-Fi pin, the Wi-Fi networks and type in the information to them. But they know about these things, and the fact that they know about them, and hopefully they can get them sorted out in the same way that Live has been sorted out, means that this is not going to be a problem forever. Yeah.
Okay, brilliant. Thanks very much, Andre. I know you've got to head off because you've had a very busy ADC and you need to get a rest. Is there anything you want to say before closing, or?
Just I'll iterate what I said earlier. Just look after yourselves. Look after number one. And if you have come across something that you think, I'm not sure if I could do that, talk to the people behind whatever it is and see if they can make accommodations if needed. Because you don't know unless you ask. Yeah? You've got a 50-50 chance of a yes-no answer. That's what I like to say.
That's great. Andre Louis, thank you very much, man.
Thank you.
Much appreciated.
And finally, for this episode, Trey speaks to Ida Barrow from Spitfire Audio.
Hi, Ida. How you doing?
Hi, I'm good, Trey. Thanks.
We're going to talk a bit more about the Diversity Scholarship Programme, which you remember of in a minute. But just tell us before how you got into music and how you got into coding in your current role as well.
So I started music kind of young. I learned piano when I was a little kid, and that just sort of ran on in the background. My real sort of moment of change was at college. I was part of the college jazz project, and I had a band leader who was she was so experimental. She was so mad whenever we played things the same way twice. She introduced me to synthesizers, which completely blew my mind at the time. Exeter and Devon in the Hole was very acoustic, folk oriented, so that completely sort of wound me up, and I decided to go study electronics and computer science, which I went there with a back goal of maybe I could do something musical with this one day.
Where did you study, if you don't mind me asking?
I believe I just did the sort of straight engineering course and tried to find ways to bring music back in through that.
That's amazing. So you're currently a developer at Spitfire. Tell us more about what you do and how you ended up in that role.
Yeah, so that was kind of just a fluke at the end of my degree. I was sort of looking at engineering prospects, and it was all just very corporate, and I was just I wanted to do something with music. That was why I came here, and I literally searched music software into Indeed, and there happened to be a Spitfire role going in C++, which is my main language, and it was a long process of interviews, but it was a really good fit, and now I work in sort of the engine team there, just doing all of the back end. None of the music stuff, but that's other people.
Okay, great. And you're on the Audio Developer Conference Diversity Scholarship Program. Tell us more about how you ended up there and why you're there, basically.
Yeah, so I am transgender, and my manager pushed me to apply for this. It's something that I struggle bringing an identity to work. It's something that I sort of have often been sort of very hiding or keeping out of bringing to sort of professional settings, and this was sort of just me trying to step into more of doing that and more of being public. And I remember when I came to ADC with my company and saw trans people presenting, I was just I would like to be someone who is visible like that. So yeah, that was sort of how I came to do this.
That's really interesting. And following on from that, I know Sound Without Sight is something that we concentrate on as accessibility. What's your perspective on accessibility in music tech from a trans perspective, if that's something which you can talk about if you're comfortable?
Yeah, from a trans perspective, ground up, there's a lot of trans electronic musical artists. There was a lot seen there. I'm in London, and so I think the thing that I sort of see the least is now that I'm over in the sort of more professional side is what the sort of links are. You sort of lose that. You're oh, you have all these artists, you have all this stuff going on. There is trans programmers, but like it's less that other way. It's very skewed. So it's like having people who are making the tools too, as well as just sort of using them is something I think I would love to see more of.
That's really interesting. Tell us about accessibility from a disability perspective, if you have any thoughts on that as well.
Yeah, so as you'll see in the conference, there's this big push towards, and this is strictly from sort of like in my company and role what we're doing, is you'll see this big push towards web UIs. Our big push towards web UIs, because previously at Spitfire, our sort of route through accessibility was to use the native instruments, like complete control, like hardware, and just making sure we were always compatible with that. It was sort of like moving it, I guess, one step away when you don't have a big team. That seems to be like often what happens. And now that we're moving towards using sort of web UIs, it's like you can start to use the huge web accessibility standards and you get to start using them in-house. So like none of us had really coded a lot of web before, so our big push at the minute is changing our just complete mash of divs, which if you've ever tried to read with a screen reader where the divs aren't labeled correctly, it's not very nice to read.
What's a div for those that don't know?
So this is just like a section of like a web page. So if you have like a header, that would be a div, but you can, instead of calling it a div, you can call it a header. And
okay, yeah.
Yeah, so it's those parts. And so we're doing a big sort of re-cleaning and like bringing everything up to standard at the start. It's always harder to go back and like change. Like you need to get sort of like accessibility things right at the start of projects for them to be well integrated, and then that's something that we can use going forward in all our products. And then at some point we will have to do the not particularly fun task of back cataloging and going back and fixing all of our old code, which doesn't adhere to that. But that's for the future.
Okay, great. Ida Burrows from Spitfire, thank you very much.
Thanks so much for chatting to me, Trey.
Thank you for listening to this episode of the Sound Without Sight podcast. Sound Without Sight is a community-driven online knowledge hub, collating information and resources to support blind and partially sighted musicians and audio engineers to break down access barriers. If you're a visually impaired musician or audio engineer, why not share some solutions you found on our knowledge hub? You can learn more and get involved at soundwithoutsight.org. If you've enjoyed listening to this podcast, please consider making a donation to support the project. You can do so at soundwithoutsight.org/donate. The music you're listening to was kindly contributed by community member Mackie Jones of MapleMixProductions.com.